You, being a businesswoman and also an anthropologist, a historian, a researcher, where do you see opportunity in the telling of our story, cultural storytelling? Where do you see the people being able to benefit from it?
Yeah, so I mean, if we're talking about benefiting from it financially, that's an interesting concept. If you want some fiat money from your storytelling, let's talk about it. It's possible, right? So a lot of like, I don't know if you know about Marvel, but a lot of people are interested in Marvel, but a lot of times those stories come from African stories, or like, because you have to keep in mind that white people intentionally went into these before they were able to colonize Africans. They actually went into these African countries and learned from them, learned their histories, learned their religions, learned all different types of things. They even, you know, like the first Europeans, like the Socrates and the Plato and all those people that were coined as being these big intellectuals, learned in ancient Kemet, from the Kemites, priests, and everything like that. So a lot of these stories that we get to see today in the entertainment industry, of movies and TV shows, come from African stories, right? And like the sci-fi industry, for example, Superman is said to be related to Amen, Osiris, Asar, Aset, things like that. That is ancient Kemet, and they paint themselves, or they actually carve themselves out of stone, which is as dark as the night. You know what I mean? And then you also have a new movie, Maleficent, who actually frankly identify themselves as the Moors, and she's in all black, but she's a white woman. Like that's our history. And then they're showing it in a way that um it's obvious, but only if you study who you are. And I think that's what the state that we need to get in, as if we want to make fiat money out of it, is that we can definitely storytell in a way that is beneficial to us, but it takes like a lot of investment, right? And then also the idea of I think even Black Panther was made a lot of money, but it was a white company who was able to get all those proceeds. You had some African people that were able to get hundreds of thousands of dollars, sure, but the company that made all the billions wasn't black, So it's a lot that you can get out of our own storytelling and doing our own comics and writing our own books, like if we so want that, right? So that's also interesting concept, because a lot of these, specifically the sci-fi stories, a lot of the sci-fi stories, they're taking from traditional stories that are seen on the continent. That's not it, but even like certain documentaries that people make, like you have to look at who are the production companies and what do they look like. They're taking stories, and that's also another problem, because then in itself they're able to not only control the narrative, but be able to profit off of the narrative. And America isn't the only one that does that. You also have other countries that end up doing that as well, that I've noticed. So it's a big industry.
All right, it's a big industry. Sure, the continent of Africa is actually overblessed. For another 1 million years to come, the resources will never finish to be tapped into. So it depends on us, actually. It depends on us to organize ourselves and begin to know that we are sitting on top of diamond. And that diamond, we can either mine it for ourselves, or we can just be crying while other people come and start mining it under our feet. All right,
Mm.
the malls. You made mention of it just now. Tell me something about the United Association of Malls. That is a project that you have, that you are organizing, right?
All right. So the United Association of Moors, we focus on community development, sustainable innovation, renewable energy, and education. And I would like to start with the sustainable community piece, right? So our idea is that we want to create communities in a space that prioritize communalism and prioritize Ubuntu, which is I am because we are. We want to exist in a community where we can trust each other. And once we're able to trust each other, and in order for us to trust each other, we have to have that the thinking of being a part of a village in order to raise up that village and protect our children, really. So it's really all about the children. And that's the idea behind that. I have a myriad of different partners that's working with me on this goal of ours to create this sustainable community. And then alongside, we're into education, right? Education is a big facet as to how we create this sustainable community. How do we get people in our communities to want to work with each other? Because we've had hundreds of years of division and divisiveness that has existed. And although that it may be, different, it may be like, oh, well, that was our past generation. Well, there's something called epigenetics. And that means that it carries on within us. Those experiences carries on within our DNA. So we need to fundamentally retrain or uneducate ourselves in order to re-educate ourselves as to how to come together again, because it's not like it's never been done before. We have to do it in a way that is sustainable, that's going to last for hundreds, if not thousands of years from now, because we never want to be put in this situation again. And the idea of Moors is not, some people would want you to believe, because this is why narrating your own story is important. Some people want you to believe that the Moors were something that was coined by white people labeling African people. That's not true. Moors, like, I'm into etymology. I'm into studying languages. I'm into studying words. Moors was a word that is seen not only in Africa, but in different all over the continent. You can find it in India, you can find it in Australia, you can find it in the Americas. And you had indigenous groups that identified themselves as Murs, M-U-U-R-S, M-I-R, all different types of things. And what it means, it's not a dark-skinned person. It actually relates to, it depends, actually. It can relate to love. It can relate to pyramid. It can relate to sun ray beam. It can relate to, or light beam, excuse me. And it can relate to seafarers, because you had Moors that controlled the seaports back and forth. A person from outside of the continent couldn't come into Africa without seeing a Moor in front of them. It can also mean anchor, right? So it has so many different meanings. It doesn't only attribute to the meaning that white people say it is. And that's the importance of actually going back and checking your references as to what language are we actually speaking. A lot of people think that they're speaking English. Yeah, we're speaking English, but how literate are we in speaking this language? There's so much we don't know about this language, and it was intentionally written and rewritten. That's why they have different forms of dictionary, because they change the meanings of words over time. And you have to think that the English language came from the Phoenicians, which is also a dark group of people. And they had created the phonetic alphabet that came from even more indigenous languages, Medu-Neter or Nasibiti. So these are really it's a very funny thing to hear when I hear somebody say, oh, the Moors is something that white people coined us and things like that. It's almost like falling into that narrative of saying that nigga doesn't have any type of African origin, right? When we have identified that nigga has a correlation with the word niggas, which relates to king and queen. And not only that, because that's an Amharic, but a lot of NGs, nig, all of that is in different African dialects and in different African languages, and it can mean a myriad of different things, because it's that ing is in our that type of language. And a lot of times the white people didn't understand the languages, so they just, go off what they hear. All right, N-I-G-G-A, whatever, nigga. And then they create a negative connotation around that word when it's in a lot of African languages, right? So we have to rethink about what has happened to us and put critical thinking towards it, right? So it's an interesting world, right?
Now, when you gather some of this information that you gather, what do you do with them? How do you get it back to the people? Because I understand that the project is a kind of a give it back. You get it and you give it back. So tell me about that process.
Right. So currently the process is whoever I'm in relationships with, who I'm partnering with, like they get to have privy to that information because they get to know me, but I'm actually like a small business. So that's the exposure will be small, but if someone learns this information and passes it on, it grows. We actually run educational programs yearly. So I'm running an educational program this summer. And I'm looking to have about 50 youth a part of that educational program. And I'm looking to expand it beyond that because I want to get actual youth that are on the continent as well. I'm looking from ages 14 to 22 or even 23. And we go through this information of wealth empowerment, one, and then two, social empowerment. So we try to debunk these social labels that have been put upon us by going through the history of how they were created, why they were created. And then I ask my youth, all right, so what do you want to be called? And why? You choose your own identity, right? What makes sense to you, not what you've been told to call yourself, but what do you want to be called? What do you ascribe yourself as being, right? Because we don't have to identify with this racial concept, because even identifying ourselves within this racial concept is supporting white supremacy, supporting it. That's how race was even created,